Well, good evening, everybody. It's Brendan Baylod of the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group. We're here tonight with another episode of Great Lakes Shipwrecks Live. Welcome to the show, everybody. I've had a couple of people mention in the past that I should give it a minute for people to get tuned in as opposed to just diving into the show. So I'll give it about a minute of idle banter here before I introduce tonight's really, really wonderful guest. Those of you who were watching the channel earlier today saw our commercial for tonight's program. And boy, do we have a great show in store for you. We have really one of my better friends in the diving community and a legend in southern Wisconsin and northern Illinois diving. Also, a legend in scuba instruction, wreck hunting. This guy's done it all, and he's got the museum to prove it. We have Dan Johnson from Loves Park Scuba, in Rockford, Illinois. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brendan. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, it's a real privilege to have you. Dan has been kind of a staple here in southern Wisconsin for a long time. He was one of our early supporters of the Ghost Ships Festival, and he helped me a lot with my book, Fathoms Deep But Not Forgotten: Wisconsin's Lost Ships. And I love going down to Dan's shop because it's not just a dive shop, right? It's a museum. It's a shipwreck artifact museum, and it's a diving history museum, and the best dive shop I've ever been in, frankly. And then also on top of that, he's got a restaurant and bar next door. So what more could you ask for? That's right. So if you look in the background of Dan's image there, you see it. Dan is in the Lockwood Pioneer Scuba Diving Museum. So we're so fortunate to have a facility like yours so close to, Wisconsin, Chicago, Rockford. So looks like we're getting some people in. Welcome, everybody. I see a lot of people starting to join the chat. So why don't we get started? Dan, I usually ask kind of everybody the same sort of thing when we get going. Tell us a little bit about your background. Where are you from? What got you interested in this? How did you get involved in something that's clearly become a lifelong passion and something that you've really kind of made your life? Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I was born in Rockford, Illinois, and my parents, they had a swimming pool when I was 3 years old, and I learned how to swim, and I loved swimming, and I watched Sea Hunt. Boy, did I like Sea Hunt. And I would watch every episode and sometimes 2 or 3 times, and that's all I ever wanted to be, was a scuba diver. When I graduated from high school, I took scuba lessons. In '74, I discovered Lake Michigan Shipwrecks. Boy, that was good stuff with Roger Chapman out of Milwaukee and the Milwaukee Recovery.
Oh, yeah, I remember Roger. Is he still around, Dan?
I don't think so. I think he passed a year or 2 ago.
That's right. Yeah, I remember him well. And so you got involved in diving pretty early and pretty heavily, and started searching for shipwrecks on Lake Michigan. How did you learn about the shipwrecks, that there were wrecks in Lake Michigan?
Well, I got the Paul Ackerman shipwreck chart, and I started going through that stuff. And a lot of the guys from the dive club, Rockford Divers, they were one of the biggest clubs in the Midwest for a while.
That's right. I remember that. So there was, I've got all of Ackerman's charts, and I remember looking at those things, and at the time they were amazing for their accuracy. We just didn't have information, and of course now they're kind of quaint by those standards. But when you started, what gave you the notion that you could actually find a shipwreck? I mean, did you know people that were doing it, or?
Well, what ultimately happened, I did a couple of years of diving on wrecks that other people were finding. And then I ran into a fellow by the name of Gene Turner. He was a commercial diver in Chicago, found a bunch of shipwrecks, and I started diving with him. And I was the muscle. When he needed somebody to help him out on a lake or something, he'd call me up, and I'd go out and help him, and he'd show me how to do it. And we had a lot of fun. I was his poor man's sonar. He had a sonar set, and then he'd go out during the week, and then he'd get a bunch of targets. And then on the weekend, I'd come out and I'd go down and verify whether it was a big boulder, a big tree, or a shipwreck.
So you cut your teeth with Gene, and Gene's still around. He's a heck of a guy.
He is. I talked to him this morning.
Very cool. I met him at your shop for the first time ever, and what a nice, friendly fellow. You know, a lot of wreck hunters are just not warm and friendly people, but Gene is just a nice guy. And the thing that struck me about Gene is he's not a young guy. He's a contemporary of John Steele's, and he had a mind like a steel tack. That guy remembered everything he ever did.
Photostatic mind. He could look inside a shipwreck and he would study it. And then he would talk about it to himself. And then he would go inside with no lines. He didn't need lines. He'd just go in there. If he had a blackout, he could find his way out, no problem.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, you were fortunate to know a lot of those guys and to kind of cut your teeth with them. So, so you obviously found a number of wrecks that we're going to talk about tonight. But one of the things that you're best known for is having a dive shop and being a dive instructor. When did that start, Dan? How did that come about? Did you have the shop before you started wreck hunting, or did you eventually start the shop later?
Yeah, I started the shop later. I did about 10 years of hard diving out on Lake Michigan, looking for shipwrecks and salvaging shipwrecks and working with Gene Turner. And then in '84, I decided that I should become a scuba instructor. And I had a shop. It was 400 square feet, 20 by 20, in a dream. And it's been a good walk.
And how big is your shop now?
Oof, I got about 5,000 square feet all total. So
It's amazing.
I have a swimming pool in there, and I got the museum, and I got the lounge, and then the store.
It's
Oh,
quite the place.
I forgot to tell you, I live upstairs.
That's right, in the lighthouse.
Absolutely.
That's really amazing. So for those of you who have not been down there, and if you haven't, I really recommend you do. This is it. The left side is the right is the dive shop, or the museum. The center is the dive shop. Kokomo's, the lounge, is on the left, and Dan lives upstairs. When did you build this, Dan? This is an amazing place.
Yeah, I built it about 12 years ago. I designed it and drew a small blueprint up, and I went down to the city hall and told them what I wanted to do. And after 5 minutes, the woman down there says, "You're not bullshitting me, are you?" I says, "No, this is what I want to do." And you see that tower is my residence. So I have commercial and residency zoning right there on my property.
Wow. And in the time I've known you, you've owned. For the dive shop, you've got this. I see you've got the ambulance / fire truck, Loves Park Scuba there.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember you've had a number of really cool dive boats too. So this is not a small operation. You really have been doing this quite a while, and really have quite a setup.
It's been a wonderful walk so far. I've had a lot of fun, met a lot of wonderful people, and I've been all over the world.
So Dan, of course, the show, the folks here, almost everybody probably who's watching from this side of the lake knows all about the wrecks that you found. You found two of the most popular wrecks for sport diving, the Lumberman and the Kate Kelly. And the Lumberman is a particular favorite of mine. I know we did some work years ago to stabilize it and keep it from opening up. Can you tell us a little bit of the story of the Lumberman and how it was found?
Sure. The Lumberman was purchased in 1893 by a fellow by the name of Mashik and Hansen, Captain Hansen. And they were running on the first run of the season. They had just bought the boat a month before. First run of the season, they were heading up to Door County to Mashik's lumber yard in Door County in his woods and so forth. And they were cutting wood for the World's Fair. It was their first run of the season. They just bought the boat. And when they got past Kenosha, Captain Hansen and his first mate and sailor, they went down below to take a nap because they were running the night shift. And they got up past Wind Point up by Oak Creek Power Plant, and a squall hit and blew her over, and it sank. And the captain, the first mate, and the sailor, they were half clothed. And I proved that by those 3 pocket knives there that you see at the top. And to the left, that Derringer was found down there too. And
Wow.
that was down inside the cabin on the bottom, and there's the captain's pocket watch. So he'd have had his the newspaper article said he was half clothed, and that meant he was in his underwear.
So this is an amazing thing to see, to have for a Great Lakes shipwreck. The number of artifacts that you've been able to preserve from this, and of course, Dan found this wreck well before the Abandoned Shipwreck Act, and so this is a rare case where there weren't 100 divers descending on it and taking everything into their garage. Dan really conserved this and then put up a museum display about it. I really have to commend you. There's very few wrecks that just have a body of artifacts that are this nicely displayed. And for those of you, we have many. Dan has many artifacts. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But tell us the story of how you found this one, Dan.
Well, I started researching it, and I got a little more research, and then I hired Fred Stonehouse and Eric Smith to come down with their sonar for the weekend, rain or shine. And they came down. Eric Smith came down, and we went out and searched for it and found it in 4 hours.
Wow. So, there's a wreck report from the National Archive. It's from the Customs Bureau, the wreck report that, was made at the time. Did that help much, or did you use other sources to figure out where it was?
Yeah, that helped a lot. They pretty much pinpointed where it was.
Yeah, and I suppose it probably screamed right off the bottom. They were using an old Westmar, I think, right? Eric had that at the time.
I think that's what it was. It was a small sonar set, but it was very effective.
Yeah. So Dan, tell us about how long did it take to recover all of these things? What year was it? It was 83, wasn't it?
Let's see. It's yes, it was.
May of 83.
Yep. Thank you. 83. Yep. I was looking at the plaque.
Yeah. So how did you get all this stuff up? And tell us a little bit about some of the coolest stuff that you were able to bring up and preserve.
Well, we got the ship's wheel and the worm gear and steering system on it, and of course we got the anchors. But the coolest thing that I really think that I've got is I got the name board, and
Yeah.
the name board is really crucial. And there's only 2 of them, and we got both of those off of there. And we got the artifacts from the captain. We got his binoculars. We got his compass. We got his galoshes. We got all kinds of stuff. Crock pottery. We got the port and starboard running lights, as you can see there. Got all kinds of tools. We airlifted the whole inside of that shipwreck and got a lot of stuff out of it by doing that.
Wow. That's amazing. And what's the engine there, that little donkey engine?
That thing straight ahead with the red on the top and the gray on the
Yeah.
bottom. Yeah, that's the bilge pump.
Okay.
And they would run a pole through there, and they'd have 2 guys on both sides pumping the water out as quick as they could if they were sinking.
Just amazing. And those rubber galoshes up there, right
Mhm.
above the compass, those are actually rubber galoshes from the captain.
Absolutely.
Wow. What
You
are
know,
some other cool things there, Dan? I know there's just so much that you found on this wreck. Any other notables? I know you have a caulking mallet. You've got what looks like a draw knife, a bunch of other stuff.
oh yeah. In those days, the sailor got paid 10 cents a day.
Wow. For a rough life too.
Well, a lot of them were desperados, and they had to get out of whatever town they were in or go to jail. So they take off and get on these boats, and they'd make a little money and sail around the Great Lakes. And they get off someplace else, and hopefully they straightened out, but you never know.
There you go. So I really like how you did this. So if you've never been to Dan's museum, there's a alcove for each different shipwreck and shipwreck hunter and important historical figure. And if you look on the ground here, he's taken tumbled lake rock to make the floor. I love that, Dan. Where'd you get the idea to do that?
Well, I love walking the shorelines, and I always put a backpack on. And while I'm walking the shorelines, particularly around lighthouses, and I had to pick up the rocks and put them in my backpack. I did it for a lot of years. And little by little, you collect this, you collect it, and you wash it really good. But the main thing is everybody wants to touch everything. They can't just look with their eyes. They want to touch it. And so by doing that, it doesn't make it so welcome for them to go over and touch everything.
Oh yeah.
these are precious artifacts and they can't be replaced. And they don't need a bunch of skin oil on there either, and so forth. And sometimes touching involves taking, and we got to be really careful about that.
Have you had any theft?
Minimal.
Minimal. That's good. That's good. Um, so the Lumberman now, is a popular dive site. I think it's in 65 feet of water. Great site. It's still amazingly intact for the shallow depth that it sank at. And Dan, anything else you'd like to mention about the Lumberman before we move on?
Well, the Lumberman made it in the top 100 best shipwreck dives in the Great Lakes book, and by Chris Coles. And that kind of fortifies that it is a wonderful wreck to dive. We sure had a lot of fun with it. It's a great wreck. It's 3 miles due east of Oak Creek Power Plant. And, it's right there by Racine's Wind Point, not far from it at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you were able to do this before the zebra mussel incursion. So now with all the quaggas, just blanketing everything, a lot of these wooden artifacts would be long gone. So, it's hard at the time. And by 1987, the Abandoned Shipwreck Act was passed, and everyone was, leave it on the bottom. Nobody could have foreseen that, leaving it on the bottom would, we would lose so many of the artifacts. So it's a real rarity you've got here, Dan. Let's talk about the next one. You not long after that, I think you were really interested in the Kate Kelly off of Racine Point, another schooner. And this is another really significant wreck, not quite as intact as the Lumberman, but I think, for my money, the stuff that came off of it is far more significant. Tell us about the story of how this one was lost and how you found it.
Okay, the Kate Kelly was actually my first one, but one thing I wanted to say, Brendan, that you touched on, preserving these artifacts. I've got thousands of hours of preserving shipwreck artifacts. When I would get the stuff, I'd bring it home. I'd get it in the garage. Wife never liked the smell, but I did. And we'd work till 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning preserving artifacts before they dried out, just so that we could have them as museum quality.
Wow. And you can imagine how long this took. You probably did every one of these pieces individually.
Yeah, we couldn't get any cars in our garage.
Wow.
Priorities. Absolutely. So the Kate Kelly was my first wreck, and I searched for 3 summers for the Kate Kelly. And I looked here, I looked there, and Gene Turner came up with his sonar, and he couldn't find it, and so forth. And talked Sam Marisi into coming up with his magnetometer. And we spent the whole day out there, and a newspaper reporter he came with, and he just wanted to see what it's like to be out on Lake Michigan and so forth. And at 8:30, we decided enough was enough. We were out there all day long, and it was a little bumpy. On the way in, we got a target. And by the time I got suited up and went down and looked at the target, it was 9:30 at night. I was the only diver in the boat, and it was my first night dive. It was a little hairy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what'd you think when you finally found this one? I assume it took you a while to find this. This is another one that you knew about and were wanting to find. Was it pretty exciting going down there and seeing all that stuff?
Wow, I couldn't believe it when my eyes saw the bottom with all the artifacts down there and stuff. I knew we had found it. And I said to Gene Turner, I says, Gene, I want to find my own shipwreck. And he says, okay. He says, maybe you can find this one. And he's the one that got me excited about the Kate Kelly.
Gotcha. So this is an amazing display you've got here. And I've been out to the Kate Kelly and the Lumberman, of course, and I've dived them. And I've just last year, Bob, Jake, and I went out and side scanned this. And honestly, the wreck was really fragmentary now. And that's what happens to these old wooden hulls after all these years. But we have an amazing collection. And this wreck's got a hell of a story, Dan. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the stories behind the wreck?
Well, there's Captain Hartley Hatch, and he was a very famous captain. He was a vice president of the Seamen's Association in Chicago, Illinois, known all over the Great Lakes. And Captain Hatch, he was an inventor, he was an entrepreneur, and he figured out how he could put a steam engine on board his sailboat and use it to raise and lower cargo. And he'd also use it to motor in and out of the harbors, because a lot of the sailboats, when they would come in, they would shoot a cannon off to signal the tugs to come out and pull them in. Well, they charged big money for that. And he had his own way of getting it in. And he also had a steam-powered bilge pump for it, so the guys didn't have to work so hard. And he set a lot of records for loading and unloading cargo in the ports. He's a very famous guy.
And you followed up and you've been in touch with his descendants, as I understand it.
Yeah, it took me 17 years to find the family after I found the wreck, to find them. And he was from Chicago. One of the mistakes I made, I called every Hatch up in the phone book and said, "Are you related to Hartley Hatch?" And everybody said no. Well, that was 4 generations ago, and they didn't know who their great great grandfather was. And so finally, I posted on the internet, so forth, and a gal from, I think she was in Pennsylvania, Doreen is her name, and she's one of the great great granddaughters, and she hooked me up with the family. And about 12 or 13 years ago, when we opened the museum, a lot of them came over. I had 5 generations here, came over to see the display and the artifacts and so forth, and brand new opening of the museum. We really had a wonderful day.
Very neat story, Dan. So tell us a little bit about some of the things that were found on the Kate Kelly. I know 7 lives were lost. This was a pretty big loss of life for Lake Michigan, especially that late, 1895.
Yeah.
What types of things were down there?
Well, the story goes, May 13th, 1895, he was heading back to Chicago with a load of hemlock ties, and he hit the North Shoals, and he was stuck there for over 30 minutes, the lighthouse keeper said in his notes. I found his logbook, by the way, from the lighthouse. And after 30 minutes, he came off of the reef, the North Shoals, and went south and sank. Approximately a mile and a half due east of Wind Point Lighthouse. He said there was 4 men at the bilge, 1 man caught in the rigging, and the guy that was caught in the rigging, I think he was trying to tip the flag upside down to notify the lighthouse keeper that he was in trouble. And the lighthouse keeper saw him, and he was watching them, but there was nothing they could do. It was a blinding snowstorm, May 13th.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it sank, and there's no way to go out and rescue them.
Tragic story. Very tragic. So that's just a lot of stuff. So that was recovered. I see you've got the wheel and a lot of blocks and deadeyes. What are those bars? Those metal bars on the bottom?
Those are lead ingots. They weigh approximately 75 pounds each, and it's pure lead. And they were tossing them off the boat. And a diver by the name of Gail Adams, a good friend of mine, and her and her husband Terry were salvaging some of them, and they followed the trail north. And when at the end of the trail, they found the ship's wheel, and they found the worm gear steering system. And Tim Van Winkle was involved in that as well, and so they raised it up. And what happened was he hit the North Shoals, and he was stuck there, and it banged the rudder off, and when it banged the rudder off, it knocked the worm gear steering system off, exposed the back end of the seawater. And that's why the guys were trying to do what they could. They couldn't steer. The back end was open. It was filling with water. They were chucking the lead out as fast as they could to get another breath of air. It took them a while to sink the boat, but when it sank, that was the end of them.
Quite a story.
There's the steam whistle. Very few schooners had steam whistles because they didn't have a steam engine or a boiler, but he had one, and he'd use that to signal shore, and then he wouldn't have to shoot off a cannon. Of course, we never found one. But that thing to the left, that's for measuring distance and speed with a propeller. I don't remember what the name of it is.
A taffrail log, or they call that? Or?
Yeah, that's what it was, yep.
Yeah, very cool, Dan. And so this thing is just crazy. It's blows my mind every time I come to your museum and I see this. Why don't you tell us about this thing? This is a beautiful steam engine. I don't think there's anything else like this in a museum anywhere.
Yeah, and it's 2-cylinder, and it's built in Chicago. And they had that on the deck of the boat with a boiler alongside. And they would run the propeller with it, or they would raise and lower the cargo and so forth. I mean, as far as I know, he was the first guy in the Great Lakes to have one of these on his ship, or I should say schooner. Uh, it's pretty unique. Of course, we had to take it apart and clean it and fix it and put it all back together again.
The wood on the heads is still there, Dan. I mean, you would never see something like that on a shipwreck anymore today.
Yeah, if you look at them right now, the heads, that's wood on there, and they used oak to insulate the cylinders to keep the cylinders hot for the steam.
Wow. How long did that take you to get that thing to restore it and to put it in that condition? That thing must have been awful when it came up. It looks like it could almost run.
Yeah, yeah. I probably have 200 to 300 hours in it, taking it apart, putting it back together again. The worst part about it is I had to raise it 3 times.
Really?
Yeah, my lift bags kept on breaking.
Oh, gotcha. I bet that thing's heavy. I mean, it looks like it weighs a ton.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's probably around 1,600 pounds. A lot of cast.
And you just got that thing into the back of a boat, and or did you have a barge? And did you put it in a pickup truck? How'd you get that thing there?
Well, that's quite a story in itself. And Gene Turner helped me with this because my boat was only 23 feet long, and it was fiberglass, and there's no way that could do that. So what we did was we raised it, and then we towed it in. And if we were in 60 feet of water, we had 200 feet of line on the back, because if one of those lift bags breaks and goes down, it could pull the back end of your boat off, and you'd have 2 wrecks on the same dive site. So we were very, very cautious with all that.
I'll bet. Well, that's an amazing, amazing artifact, Dan. Um, so, I mean, these are, oh, there I am. This is another shot of the dive ship. What is that steering gear that I'm clutching there?
That's off the J.D. Marshall. Gene Turner found that off of Indiana Dunes State Park, and it's in probably 40, 50 feet of water, and that turned turtle on it. And overnight, and then what happened was it had a leak. When it turned over, it tipped upside down and killed the helmsman. And when I found it, I had no idea how to raise it. And I called Gene Turner up and I says, "Hey, Gene, I found the ship's wheel on a shipwreck that you found." He says, "You're kidding." I says, "Nope." I says, "It's got some steering stuff on there as well, rigging." And he said, "You want some help getting it up?" I says, "Oh boy, yeah, I'd like some help." So I came down with my little boat, and he came out and he showed me how to do it. That was my first heavy lift. And
Really?
yeah, I'd have probably killed myself if he didn't come, and he probably figured that out. And so he told me what to do. Yeah.
Oh, very neat. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I think I got this slide a little bit out of order, but Dan, let's move on and talk a little bit more about another topic I know is near and dear to your heart, and that's the history of diving, commercial diving. And in particular, I know you have done a lot of research on really one of the earliest commercial divers in Wisconsin, and certainly in Racine, John Harms. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who John Harms was and what you got in, how you got interested in him, and why he's significant?
Sure. John Harms, he was the first scuba diver in June of 1895 on the Kate Kelly. The spars were sticking out of the water. None of the bodies had been recovered, and he went down there to see if he could find the captain's body and the other bodies and so forth. And he dove on it 3 days in a row in June. Now it sank May 13th, but he couldn't get out there until June. Don't know why. It's probably because the seas were rough. But as far as I can tell, and I really hope if there is another diver that was earlier in that area, I'd sure like to know. But as far as I know, he was the earliest diver on this side of the lakes. And he worked for Knapp and Gillen Company. Knapp and Gillen Company was out of Racine. Now Gillen Tug Company is in Milwaukee. And so he worked for them, and then he joined the life-saving station in Racine. And he row out there and rescue sailors and people that were out there and so forth with the team. And then he became a police officer and made his way all the way up to detective. And in November of 1918, he was accidentally run over by a train in Racine off the Hamilton Street crossing by a train going backwards in town.
Really?
Yeah, and he was the first officer killed in the line of duty in Racine, Wisconsin, but his name never got put on the plaque. Don't know why, but I can tell you that the name's on the plaque now. I spent a lot of time uh, trying to make sure that he got his name on the plaque, but as the fallen officer of Racine Police Department. It's quite a guy. His father was the desk sergeant there, and his name was Kloss Arms. And I researched him when I didn't have anything to do in the middle of the winter and so forth. I'd go research John and see what happened to him. It's kind of interesting. To me, he was a hero. He's a shipwreck diver in 1895.
That's very early. And don't you actually have some you have a lot of original hard hat dive apparatus, and some of the stuff might have been used by Harms, correct?
Yeah, the one on the right, the middle of the screen to the right there with the lights coming out of it. I believe that's his hard hat. From talking with a lot of the experts around the Great Lakes, that it's of that era. And I bought that at Palmer Johnson Shipyard in Racine. We had a bad day. We couldn't go out diving. We're kicking around town a little bit, and I went in their shipyard there, and they had a suit in there with that helmet there. The guy said he had the suit sold, but he says the helmet's for sale. And I asked him how much. He said $250. I didn't even try to chisel him down. I got the credit card, and I got that thing and put it in my truck. And that boy, I was smiling all the way home.
Oh, I bet. And Dan, I mean, this is real stuff like that. That air delivery system there, that handle driven system. Where did you get something like that? I mean, that's real.
Yeah, that came from Gene Turner. He donated it to me, and it's a three-stage deep water pump, and that was a really nice one. And I'm not sure the name of the company on it because I haven't been able to find it. Usually they just put the name on the wooden box that went around it. But yeah, I took that apart too and got that all in really good working order.
That thing could probably work now. I mean, legitimately.
Oh yeah,
How old is it?
turn of the century.
Wow. So, I mean, your museum here goes all the way from, back in the early days of salvage diving right on up to the pioneering times into the modern era. I mean, it's really amazing what you put together there. And I really like the old ads for all the hard hat divers in the back on your back wall here, only because I'm the one who got them for you.
Yeah, that was much appreciated. The upper left one there, Brendan, is
Yeah.
the Schrader Company, and they were 1844. They were making stuff in the United States, and the Schrader valves that's on your car tires. Those are the guys that invented those, because they had to have a one-way valve for the divers, because if the hose ruptured or something, the water pressure would crush the guys underwater. They needed to have that equalization pressure.
Oh, sure. That makes sense. It's amazing, amazing story that your museum tells. Let's talk about that a little bit. Unless, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about with John Harms? I know you spent a lot of time researching him.
Yeah, he was my hero. And boy, if anybody out there has any information on John, I'd sure hope they'd share it with me, because I keep a file on him. I was never able to find the family um, of him, and they all kind of deceased.
Yeah, I remember I did some census lookups on him, and it seemed like things came to an end with the family. But yeah, if anybody knows of John Harms, he's a kind of an important early figure in Wisconsin commercial diving and really in Great Lakes commercial diving. So, well, Dan, let's talk about the museum. So, Lockwood Pioneer Scuba Diving Museum. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how that came to be? So, you were a well-known wreck hunter and dive instructor and dive shop owner, but when did the museum come into being, and how did that happen?
Well, Jim Lockwood lived in Rockford, Illinois for a lot of years, probably 40 years. And he walked in when he was an older gentleman, uh, middle to late 80s, and he was very frail, pounded on my counter, said I was diving in the 30s. I was diving. And this, that, and the other, and so forth. I made him sit in a chair because I was afraid he's going to collapse on me. And he sat down and he was telling me his stories and so forth. And well, I knew sport diving started in 1943 with Jacques Cousteau and Amelia Gagnon. And but he said he was diving in the 30s, so I didn't really believe him. But I let him talk, and so forth. And I think he could read it in my eyes. And the next day he showed up with not all his research, but a little bit of his research. And the research was the newspaper article of him, December 9th, 1938, with his self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. It was actually a rebreather. But remember, self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, that's self-contained. And that's him demonstrating it at the Boys Club in Rockford, Illinois. He later took this rebreather and sold it to the military with the help with Desco. I'm not sure how that partnership worked. Max Knowles and Jack Brown owned Desco, and they ended up reproducing his rebreather system. And but he was sworn to secrecy because there's no bubbles. And if he had said anything to anybody, that could have been an act of treason, punishable by death back in those days.
Really?
Yeah. So anyway, he made 12 of them all total, and I've got his blueprints, and I've got two of his rebreathers in the shop. I've got his #2 rebreather in the shop, and they retrofitted it with the Jack Brown Brownie mask later, and that was his first one. Go back one slide there. There you go. That was one more. Yep, there you go. One more forward. Yep. Nope. That one. Let's see. Go one more back. Nope. There, right there. Yeah, and you see that copper tubing and stuff with a little mouthpiece on there, and with that young man going scuba diving with it. And he told me, he says, what you do is you just breathe on this and back and forth and so forth. And he says, when you get a little sleepy, you open this valve here and give you a little more oxygen. But you notice that he's only got eyeglasses on, and that was before a full face or a face mask. And
Sure.
Lockwood invented a plastic face mask as well to cover the nose. And I've got his blueprints here as well. And that was in the very early 40s. That's the next, that one right there, that's his #2 rebreather that he made. And then the Wolverine was carrying the airplane pilots in World War II. And the airplane pilots that weren't so successful, they were on the bow and they were on the stern. They had a fast attack boat that would run over there and slap the wings with a sling so that the boat wouldn't sink, and then they'd use the Lockwood rebreathers to pull the pilots out. Both on the bow and in the stern, they had the rebreathers, and he was in charge of that operation. And he also took the first submarine down the Mississippi River. He was the officer in charge, and they loaded up the Pito. And the Pito was the first submarine built in the Great Lakes, and they put it on a barge, and he was the officer, and he had a couple other guys that went with him that were handy with guns, and they went down the Mississippi River, and the Pito ended up going over to Australia, and that's where it served for World War II.
Sure. I know of it from, it was a Manitowoc build, wasn't it?
Yes, they still have a submarine up there.
Oh,
And
yeah.
boy, that's an interesting sub, and it's all the same blueprints.
Yeah. So what's interesting to me here is that so you meet this old guy. He comes in. He tells you, "Oh yeah, I was a famous diver and I invented stuff." And it turns out it's all true, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did it end up that he ended up basically endowing the museum? That was a heck of a thing. How'd that come to pass?
Lockwood was a very, very smart man. He never got married, never had any kids. So anyway, he gave me a little chunk of money and to get the museum going and so forth. And the college down in Key West for scuba diving, they got a chunk of money. And Dive Heart, they got a chunk of money as well from the estate. And there's a number of different diving places that charities that got money from his estate. He had nobody to give it to.
Yeah, and so he needed every place to put to really, leave his innovative scuba stuff, and so that's really where it ended up. And you also have a lot of material on Max Knoll, as I understand it.
Yes, I got most of the files on Max Knowles. Max died in the very early 60s. I'm thinking it was 61. He was in a car accident. There was a guy that his brakes went out and he hit him in the back end of the car, and the car exploded with him and his wife in it. And they had a pact between Max Knowles and Lockwood for $30,000. And what it was whoever died first, his estate gave the other one the 30,000, and they had to buy something, a toy, pleasure toys with it. They could not use it for business or anything else, so that they would remember their best friend. And Lockwood bought a Jaguar and a Chris Craft, and he had the Chris Craft down in Florida. And so that was tragic. He was a young man when he passed. And Max Knowles, he did the deep water diving record in 1938, 420 feet deep, but it was only scheduled for 350. And wow. Dr. Ed Grend, he was busy throwing up over the side of the boat, and Knowles called up on the intercom, "Drop me to the bottom. There's no bottom here." And it was 420 feet deep. And the idea was he wanted to make sure that everybody knew he was actually on the bottom, and he got his knees in the mud down there, or the clay, so that when they brought him up, he could say, "Yeah, I was on the bottom," and how deep it was. They could verify everything. And Dr. Ed Grand, he had to quit throwing up and redo his experimental 350-foot dive tables for 420 feet deep. And he did them right. And he didn't get the bends, and everybody was happy that day.
Cool story. And that's something that Jim Lockwood and Max Knoll were best friends, this old guy that you just met. And, for those of you, most of us over here in Wisconsin, of course, know who Max Knoll was. He, really a pioneer, deep diver and innovator. The fact that Jim Lockwood knew him, and they were both, such large figures, and you have so much of their material, is really something. So what do we have here, this picture?
That is a picture of the Lockwood rebreathers with the help of Max Knowles. They were teamed up on this, and they were doing the underwater props for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea for Walt Disney. Isn't that amazing?
It is. It really is. Those guys, were also involved in the salvage of the Prince Willem, were they not? In some ways.
Yeah, Max Knowles got the salvage bid for it, the Prince Willem, when it sank, and so they spent the first 80 days taking the goodies off and bringing it in and so forth. And they had 90 days to get her lowered to below 30 feet, so it was not a navigational hazard. Well, when he bid $79,000 to do it, and everybody else, all the other salvagers were 100,000 this, 120,000 that, and so he got the salvage contract, but nobody dove on it but him. He was the first one that dove on it. The rest of the guys, they imagined this and they imagined that. Well, so what he did was he had 10 days left. Jim Lockwood was running the salvage mission there with him and so forth. And there's a platform a gangplank where people could come and go off the ship. That was actually where it was a navigational hazard. And it took them all of about 4 to 8 hours to take that gangplank off and lowered it below 30 feet. And then they told the government, "Okay, here's your bill." And they said, "No, we're not paying it." He says, "We've been watching you, and we're not going to pay you that kind of money for 4 to 6 hours worth of work." And he says, "Well, okay." So then he talked to his father, who was an attorney in Milwaukee, and his father talked to his brother that was a federal judge, and they decided, well, maybe they should just get paid. But
That's quite a story. I've heard that. All he had to do, the version I heard was that he just had to close the gangplank, like knock it over to get the money. But I imagine it was a little more than that. But
yeah, bolted.
quite a bit of local history. And the Prince Willem, for those of you who are not in Wisconsin, is really kind of our local tourist wreck, but it's a huge part of Milwaukee's history. And Jerry Geyer takes probably more divers to the Willie each year than visit other wrecks in a decade. It's the most visited wreck on the Great Lakes, and for that reason, it's also had the most fatalities. It's on its side in about 75 feet of water, Dan.
No, it's actually a 90, but
90. That's
if
right.
you go all the way around the ship with your sonar, okay, you're going to measure that about 65, 70 feet deep. And what's happened is the ship has actually pushed the bottom down because of the weight.
That's right.
The maximum is 90, but the upper gunnels is somewhere around 40, 45 feet.
Yeah, I've dived it a few times over the years. I've never penetrated. I was never a really daring diver, but certainly a really beautiful dive if anybody ever gets over here from, if you're not from this area and you want to check out a really cool wreck, this is a hell of a dive. Give Jerry Geyer a call. Or Dan, you still do charters in the summer as well, don't you?
Yes, we do. We have a new charter boat this year, and we can take 12 divers out at once with it, and it's got a big platform on it, and it's 24 feet by 10 wide, and it really works out good for doing diving and so forth. But I forgot to tell you, Brendan,
Yeah.
that that's a pretty good chunk of change that he got from the government, but he made more money. He sold the thing 3 times, and every
Really?
time he sold the Shipwreck, it was in the contract that they had to have it raised in 1 year's time. And if it didn't, it went back to him. So he put it up for sale again. He sold it 3 times.
It looked like it should have been easy to raise, but for many reasons it wasn't,
Well, Max, if Max had his teeth into it, he'd have got it up, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
some of the other guys, they just didn't. And I think 1 or 2 divers died trying to salvage that as well.
Yeah, it's got quite a story. Somebody could write a book just about the Prince Willem and the history of it. And it's still down there. So, well, Dan, one of the other things that I really like about your museum is that in addition to the Lockwood material and the Max Knoll material, you have stuff from like every major wreck hunter on the Great Lakes. And your Gene Turner section is really cool. Your John Steele section is really cool. This is just an amazing display. And to me, the coolest part of it is that chest from the Ironsides. Can you tell folks that are listening a little bit about what that is, that chest?
Absolutely. That's a chest in there. And that chest was one of the crew members' chest. And there's a lot of tools in there. And the tools, they used them for leather work and for woodworking as well. And Gene found that chest, and then he brought that up, and right alongside that was another chest, and that was a lighter weight chest, and it's leather, and he brought that up, and it was full of wigs. And they had a whole bunch of them. This guy got some, and that guy got some, and so forth. But back in the let's see what year that one sank.
Yeah, to be honest, I can't remember off the top of my head either when the Ironsides went down.
1873.
Yeah.
It sank. I don't think they made wigs back then, but I'm sure they had scalps.
Yeah, it's interesting that these wigs, which you see on top here, are these human hair wigs that came up, and they were intact when the Ironsides was found, and they were preserved. And so Dan's actually got these original wigs that sank in 1873. And what were you telling me one time that it would have that you could actually do like DNA testing on them or something?
Yeah, I should send some of them in for DNA testing to find out, what culture they came from. And I just haven't got around to it yet.
Find out if there's any living descendants.
But there's a good story on those chests. Those were, you just didn't go down there and find a chest laying in there. You had to penetrate that shipwreck a long ways to get in. And then you got to bring them through the passageways, and the Ironsides is fairly deep, and get them up. I mean, that was hardcore stuff. And that was back in I think it was the late 60s that they found it.
Yeah.
Gene Turner actually found it, and then him and John Steele did a little of this and a little of that, but Gene never dove on it. And then the 2 of them hooked up and dove on it and so forth. And you can see all the artifacts from it. There's a lot of tools, There were socks in there, shoes, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and all of Gene's stuff and most of John's stuff, John Steele's stuff, actually it ended up here at the museum and is just beautifully curated and displayed. And this is John's old wreck hunting boat that he sold to Sam Marisi. This is I think the boat that he found the Car Ferry Milwaukee from, and a few of the other major finds.
I believe so. That was the Sea Diver. That was quite a boat. Oof.
Yeah, he had a big World War II surplus sonar mounted on here. One of the things that I think is really cool, Dan has like a virtual museum of shipwreck hunting technology from back in the day. Tell us about what this is, Dan.
That's Sam Marisi's magnetometer, and that's the one that we use to find the Kate Kelly with. The sonars, they go a lot farther, but when the shipwrecks are all beat down, the sonars had a hard time finding them. So a magnetometer, when you get hit with a mag, you know there's iron down there, and so there's got to be a shipwreck down there.
And that's a classic old mag. I mean, but it would still work probably. But what is that, sort of 1960s, technology?
No, I'm thinking it's more of the 70s, maybe
Okay.
late 70s. They were quite expensive. That was $13,000 new back then.
Wow. And then this is a real oldie. Tell us about this.
Yeah, that's Gene Turner's ELAC sonar set, and he had that in his boat, and that was World War II vintage. And that's what Gene used to find a lot of his shipwrecks with.
Yeah, and for those of you who are out there with your Garmin's now, imagine using something like this. It just what did it do? The ones that I've seen had a acoustical. You could hear like a popcorn popping sound, but then you could also see blips on that oscilloscope screen. But it sure as hell wasn't anything that looked like a shipwreck. It was, just sort of a distance range and where you got a sound, like where it encountered an obstacle, right?
Yeah, and what would happen is on the screen, there would be a line that would go there. And if there's a shipwreck there, it would break the line and it would go, and then you knew that there was something big down there, put it that way.
I
And
used one of these with Steve Radovan. We actually used one. I mean, Steve had some old time shit, and we actually used one of these. And oh God, 20, 30 years ago. And he called it the popcorn machine. And you just listen. He wouldn't even look at the screen. He'd just have a headset on and he'd listen and you could hear. And every once in a while you'd hear, and he's like, oh, there's something.
yeah, yeah.
Imagine that.
That's how they found the Christmas tree wreck with the sonar like this. And the story goes that Kent Bell Richards stopped the boat, put it in idle, was fixing a sandwich, and the boat was drifting. And he heard the sound, the crackling sound on the sonar. And sure enough, there it was.
Very cool. Well, this is some amazing stuff, Dan. If any of you guys after the plague is over want to really see an amazing museum, my God, it's a bucket list thing to take the drive to Loves Park to Rockford and see what Dan's got there. It's a real treasure. So, Dan, why don't we talk a little bit about it? You also have a heck of a dive shop, and you do a lot of cool stuff there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the things you offer there, and some of the things that the shop that you do?
Certainly. We offer private scuba lessons now. We have our own pool right on site. It's 11 feet deep, and it's 1.3 atmospheres, and the water temperature is right around 85 degrees. And so we teach scuba 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you're working nights, we have lessons early morning or whenever you want to have them. And then we also do semi-private classes. And the museum tours, I need to touch on that. We have to be a little careful about that right now because we can't have big coming in. And most of my staff is laid off. And when we do museum tours, I have to be there or somebody has to be with the people in there. We have a lot of precious artifacts worth thousands of dollars, and we just can't have people wandering around freelancing the museum.
Yeah, it's a spring thing when the plague is over. So, Dan, you were talking about that beautiful new dive boat. I think this is it. 12 divers at a time.
Yeah, it's a construction grade, privately built pontoon boat with jumbo pontoons on it. The pontoons on that are 3 times the size of what they should be for a regular boat. And in the aluminum that they used is a real heavy gauge aluminum. I've got 3 motors on there. And that top that you see there goes up and down. So when I'm traveling down the road and it's pneumatic, I just take a mini scuba tank and I hook it up, and the top goes up. And then when I'm driving down the road, the top will go down.
Wow.
Boat that's 10 feet wide is very stable. It doesn't rock like the other boats do.
Yeah. Boy, that'll be a great platform for dive training. Why don't you tell us about Bill Lambert? Now, there's quite a story. I think I saw that in the newspaper.
Yeah, 3 times. Bill's quite a guy. He came to me when he was 98 years old. He's living in an assisted living place. His wife had passed. That's why they moved. And he was in pretty good shape. He was born in Chicago. And that guy, you see his date of birth, and it's September 5th, 1920. He lived the roaring 20s and the 30s. And he wanted to learn how to scuba dive. So I said, okay. And we taught him how to scuba dive. He did really, really well. It was all private classes, and we had to take a lot of special concerns. When I taught him how to dive, every skill that he did, he had to do 3 and 4 times repeatedly. And by doing it that way, it was setting a good seed in his brain that this is the way you do it. So he beat the guy that had 96 years. He was a record holder at Guinness Book of Records, and Bill beat him by 98 by 2 years. And after he found out about this guy, he called me up and said, well, did he this and did he that? And I says, well, yeah, he did this, he did that, da 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 da, all his skills and da da da. He's 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 saying I couldn't be. And I says, well, you're just going to have to wait your turn. That was kind of the end of the conversation. This guy here, and I got to say that Bill beat his 98 record, he beat his 99 record, and now he's 100-year record. And
Wow.
this little guy here, Jackson is his name, and it's my bookkeeper's son. And he had autism pretty severely. He couldn't talk, and all his food had to be baby food. And I read on Hyperbaric News that somewhere around 60 dives, the kids with autism are significantly better, but they at 1.3 to 1.5 atmospheres. But nobody can afford that. It's expensive. And I got to thinking my swimming pool is 1.3 atmospheres. So we taught this little guy how to dive when he was 4.5 years old. It was quite a chore. His mom dove, and I've known his mom for a long time. They lived next door to me, and so forth. So we started him out in the shallow end, real easy on the surface, and worked with the years. Now, this guy can't talk. All he can do is grunt and yell, and he's very disruptive. And little by little, every week he healed. And so I'm going to fast forward it now. Last year, he went to kindergarten, mainstream with everybody else, and he did extremely well. And the teacher said that she had never known he had autism if she didn't read it in his folder.
Very cool story, Dan. Dan, what's that thing?
That's a one-man submarine that was designed back in the very early 60s, and that was by Captain James Logan, Maine. And he used to live up in this area, and then he moved to Florida in the Pensacola area, and he's still alive, and he donated that to the museum. I see 1973 on the side there, and it's quite a little one-man submarine. Got a little motor in there and battery system and so forth.
So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, Dan, just to move along. But that's
Sure.
you and Remy.
Yeah, we're in Cuba, and we're diving the Island of Youth in Cuba. And boy, Cuba is one of my favorite places to go. We went there 3 times last year. We ran trips.
So you do run trips as well, which is really cool.
Yep.
And is this the same little guy?
Yep, that's Jackson.
All right. And who's this guy?
Well, his dive name is Mighty Mouse. His name is Logan, and that's 3 generations there. And the guy to the left is Grandpa, and the guy to the right is his father. And he's going for the youngest Master Scuba Diver Award in the world. And right now, the world record is 12 years old, and he's 10. And we're heading down to Florida to dive some of the caverns and the springs down there to get his 50 dives in, and his rescue diver and all the rest of the certifications, deep water diver and so forth that he needs to get for that. We're going to go down there in December.
Cool.
And we're going to spend a week and a half down there. So it should be a lot of fun. He was in practicing today, and he was in yesterday practicing. and he's ready.
We get a good shot of your pool there. You can see what that looks like. Dan, I'm going to move forward just because we're actually at 8 o'clock. But you do a lot of stuff there at the shop. I know you've had weddings, you've had birthday parties, and then you also have Kokomo's Lounge right next door, which is something you've started. Really great place to go after dive training or after a visit to the museum.
Yeah, if you look at that guy's cart there, it's handicapped, and he's got wheelie bars on the back. He's got my dive team sticker on there and a little flag, and he'll do burnouts out in the parking lot with that thing.
So
So
Dan, let's bring it back because I think what we're going to do is do a little question and answer. Anything else you wanted to talk about before we bring it back and do some Q&A?
I think we did a really good job, and I sure do appreciate it, and I'd be more than glad to answer questions.
Anybody have any questions for Dan about anything we covered tonight? Any of the wrecks or anything? Let's see if I can take a look on the thing here. We'll give it a second. So, Dan, I know you are a real enthusiast about hyperbaric medicine and about and you've used it in a lot of things. I know you research it a lot. And you've told me some amazing stories about it. Anything you'd like to mention about that?
Yeah, I discovered, I belong to the Hyperbaric Association, and I attend all their meetings and so forth. And we were talking with the doctors, and the doctors are telling me that I'm moving 4 to 5 times faster per dive than what they are. So we had to scratch our heads about that for just a few minutes. And we figured that my guys are swimming around with good blood circulation. Their guys are just laying there. And it really helps with the blood circulation, but not everybody's capable of diving.
Yeah. So Dan, we have a question from a viewer. They want to know if there's a wreck on your bucket list that you haven't dove yet. Probably a Great Lakes one.
I got a long bucket list, but I'm done shipwreck hunting. I do a lot of teaching and a lot of trips all over the world. And I love the shipwreck diving, but there's a time you got to give it up. And I'm getting older.
There you go. Well, guys, it's 8:03. I think we're going to wrap it up. I wanted to let everybody know. Dan, somebody's asked, what treasure coin are you wearing?
Oh, that's from Mel Fisher, the Tosha. Yeah, and that's a good story. I was down in Miami. I had a dive shop in the Turks and Caicos Islands, and I was advertising people to come down to go diving. And he had just found the wreck, and he was selling these things. He wanted $600 for it. I only had 400, and I told him I only have 400. He says, "Well," he says, if I don't sell this coin by the end of the show, he says, "I'll sell it to you for 400." And sure enough, he didn't sell that one, and so I got it for 400. I was really happy about that.
Very cool. Got a question that I think I'll field here. Somebody's asking about finding out more about the Manitowoc built submarines like the Peto. The Wisconsin Maritime Museum there at Manitowoc has just immense files on all those. Plus, they've got an actual example of a sub there. And but yeah, they're a great organization, and you can give them a call, or I think they are probably, I don't know if they have regular visitation hours right now because the darn plague is peaking right now, but they will probably sooner than later. So do check that out. So he's asking, any World War II aircraft that you have ever found? I know there's some of them off the area there.
Now there's some other guys finding those, and Paul Ehorn, he's been raising a lot of them for those guys. But I've never been interested in the airplanes.
Yeah. All righty. Well, why don't we wrap it up? We're at 63 minutes. We are going to have a Zoom room tonight, everybody. It's going to be at 8:20. So I'm going to post the link on the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group, and click on it, and Dan will be there, and we will have ourselves a social hour, have a couple of drinks. So let's take a 15-minute break and go get ourselves some refreshments and use the little boys' room if we need to. And join us in the Zoom room if you want to meet our guest tonight, Dan Johnson. So thank you so much, Dan, for doing this. It was a real pleasure talking to you. I always enjoy spending time with you, even virtually.
Thanks for having me, Brendan.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
And it's closing down. So Dan, that went really well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you're good at it. You prompt me.
People really liked it too. The comments are really good. People are commenting left and right on the page. Great interview. They really enjoyed it. They thought you were really knowledgeable. So very good stuff. Um, Boy, it's having some trouble shutting down. Hope we don't lose. I hope this recorded correctly. It streamed on the page. Everyone saw it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Getting a network error. Oh well, I'm sure it's saved. I want to upload it to YouTube. Anyway, Dan, why don't we? I will send you in the chat the Zoom room link. Uh,
Okay.
Click on it, and if you have any problems, let me know. Have you used Zoom before?
I never have, no, but
All
I
right,
hope.
well, don't worry about it. Zoom is a lot more user friendly than BeLive.
Okay.
So I will send you a link. You just click on it. It may ask you to install a plugin or something in your browser, but it should work. All right.
I'll see you in a few minutes.
All righty, Dan. Watch your chat for the link. Talk to you later.
How soon do you want me to watch for the link?
Oh, we're still live. Um, it hasn't shut down. I'll have to edit this out when we do the. Thanks for whoever just chatted or whoever just told me that we're still live.
Okay. I'll step away from the computer for 5 minutes. Is that okay? Or do you want me to wait?
No, I'm going to shut this down, and I just want to make sure that it saves, and then
Okay.
I'll edit this off of the YouTube version. So thanks everybody again. Thank you for those of you who mentioned to me that we're still live. I'm trying to shut it off, but I got a network error from the. Hold on, let me try one thing. I'm going to reload it. Alrighty, and stop.